Hello, and welcome back to She Makes It Work with Gabby and Abby. Today, we're talking about grief in the workplace. I have with me today the amazing Angela Mitakidis, a grief therapist, my grief therapist, actually. In 2022, I was leaving work one day and I got a phone call that my dad had tragically passed. And it began a really weird process for me, not knowing how to navigate this, not knowing how to show up as my best self at work, wondering why I wasn't showing up as my best self at work, shaming myself for not showing up as my best self at work. And so I really, really wanted to do this episode today to help teach everyone the things that I've learned in this process so that you don't have to go through this without a guide. About a month after my dad died, I still wasn't showing up as my whole self at work. I was not showing up in the way that I was used to. I wasn't high functioning. I was making mistakes that I usually wouldn't make. I was saying things I wouldn't usually say and doing things that didn't make sense for my values, didn't align with my values. Notably, I was on a work leadership call with a bunch of leaders in my organization and ended up calling the owner of our company a narcissist on that call. And that is so against my values. I don't name call in general, and I would never usually do that at all or be in public. And that was my wake up call of like, oh, something's wrong. And I have a really robust emotional toolbox, but I realized pretty quickly I didn't have the emotional tools to get through this and that I needed to find somebody who did so they could teach me those tools so I could get through what I was going through, so I could start showing up better as myself. So enter Angela. I found Angela through a friend, so great referral. I started seeing her, and I remember the first time I sat down on the couch, I was like, okay, so like, how long till I can get back to normal? Like, what, a couple sessions, couple weeks? And she started telling me things that really rocked my world. Specifically, and we'll talk more about this, but specifically about how in trauma, the blood flow in my brain was rerouted from my executive functioning, where I was incapable of making good decisions, to my limbic system, or the survival, fight or flight, keep me alive system. So no wonder I was messing up and not saying things that aligned with my values. No wonder I wasn't making good decisions. I was literally incapable, biologically incapable of making good decisions. And learning that, just that piece, there's so much more to it and we'll get into it, but just that piece right there was exactly what I needed to really set me free of the shame of feeling like I had to perform at the high level that I was performing at before this trauma happened. And so today I want to talk about all of these things that, grief brings. Grief is what I call it when I've coached some people on grief since then. I've been able to bring in the tools that I've learned with Angela, that grief is more of an umbrella emotion, that it covers all of these myriad of emotions, not just sadness and anger, but there's so much that we pack under grief. So I call it an umbrella emotion because it houses a lot of different things and they come in waves, and there's no linear stage, and we'll get into that. So that's how we got here, and that's why I want to share all of this with you. And so now I want to ask you, Angela, thank you so much for joining us today. Like, really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, actually.
Yeah. So if you want to give us a little background on you, would love that.
Yeah, so I have worked the majority of my life with families. And when you work with families, you work with everything. You work with grief, you work with marriage, you work with children and teens and so on. But I found in the most recent months or years that I was getting a lot of grief clients. So, and I think, most of us have probably encountered grief on some level.
Yeah.
So I did resonate with that a lot. And I really delved into the study of the neuroscience behind what's going on in our brain when we're sad, angry, shocked. And so I was able to bring that into my therapy room. And I found that it set a lot of my clients free. And your reaction, I mean, you were a dream client because you believed me. And I think that's the most difficult part is people don't know about the brain.
Hmm.
So it's pretty nebulous. And so, you wonder, is she talking a little bit out there? Maybe it's not. But really, this is so researched, and I encourage people to go and have a look and study and just read up on it a little bit. But yeah, coming to you, I think everything you described to me was just so normal. And I think being able to normalize it for you was step one,
It was because I did not feel normal at
right?
all. I felt so abnormal. I was like, what is wrong with me?
Yeah,
Like, okay, yeah, sure, my dad died, but I should be able to get back to it. I should be able to function. I should.
yeah,
I was shooting all over myself.
yeah.
And so, yeah, you did. You normalized. You're like, you're exactly where you should be.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first time my brain was like, oh, so there's nothing to
Right,
fix.
right.
I can just be. And that was
Exactly.
really powerful.
Yeah, because your brain will fix itself.
Mm.
So, one thing I really want to stress is the brain is an organ, just like our heart or our lungs or, anything in the body that needs to function. So, sometimes our brain needs a little bit of care and support and attention. So, the way that it functions in this regard, when you're struggling with trauma, the brain is just a marvelous organ because its whole function is to keep us surviving and to keep us functional. We can get up in the morning and go about our day. Even if you have sadness and you're carrying that trauma and sadness, you're still functional. And that is what the brain wants to do.
Mhm.
But initially, the brain is hit with this shock. The brain doesn't know what this is. What is death? What is death of my dad in particular? It's never encountered that before, right?
Right.
So it's got to calibrate. It's got to, whoa, what's going on? Hang on. This is a shock to Abby. It's coming at her like a tiger in the room.
Mm.
So, an important distinction is, or non distinction, is the brain doesn't distinguish between a physical or emotional threat. Isn't that amazing?
That. Like, say it louder for the people in the back.
Yeah, the brain does not differentiate between an emotional or physical threat. So it will react, and of course, according to the severity of it, it will react in the same way as if there was a tiger in the room with gnarling teeth about to attack you. The brain's going to go, run,
Mhm.
or hit it, fight it, or you freeze,
Mhm.
depending on your makeup and the way your body reacts. And so, why does it do that? Because at that moment, the brain is not thinking with, and I like to do this to remind us that our frontal lobe is actually our area of reasoning
Mhm.
and logic and
Mhm.
executive functioning. At that moment, the brain's not going to go, let me suss this out. What do I know about a tiger? Right, I can see those teeth are coming at me. Maybe I should run or wonder what I should do. Should I kick it? The brain's not doing any of that. The brain says in a split second, run. You're in danger. Get out. Survive.
Survive.
And once we're away from danger, the brain will say, okay, what happened there?
Yep.
And then
We can unpack that
we
later.
start
But first, we have to
restoring.
survive.
Yes.
Yes.
And there is a physiological reason for that. So what happens is our limbic system, which if you look at the thumb and the fist, imagine that this is the front of your head, this is the back of your head, and the inside is what we call our limbic system. It's our survival center. It's where everything takes place to make sure we're going to survive. And what's covering that is the frontal lobe, our executive functioning, right? So think of it this way. As the trauma hits, this limbic system is activated. And once it's activated, it flips its lid. So it literally removes the executive functioning from the picture. And physiologically, what's happening is simply the blood flow. The blood flow is drained from the frontal lobe and literally starts to travel to our extremities. So, how do I mobilize myself to run, to jump up and go? And
Mhm.
that's why a lot of the times after trauma, you feel shaky.
Yeah.
Your breath is stunted. You're breathing shallow. You're kind of breathing chest-wise.
Yes.
All of these physiological things are happening because you had to get out of the danger.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the beauty of the brain. And when we understand why we react sometimes, it's because our brain is doing its thing. It's doing what it was created for.
The brain is braining.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that is what was so helpful to me to know coming in and realizing that, hey, this isn't like a 3 to 4 week process. This isn't unfolding. This is really reacclimating to a new life with my dad, this person that's been in my life my whole life without him in it. And I realized that this was a journey, not a destination. And it was a journey that I now get to create with these new tools. So just knowing that foundation, that's why I wanted to bring this episode to our platform, is because knowing that was so empowering. And that's what we're about here, is empowering you with information to be your best self. And that just really just unlocked a lot of things for me. And also the stages of grief, because we've all heard of the stage of grief, and it sounds like, okay, you do one stage, you're done, you move to
Mm-hmm.
the next, but that you taught me that's not true either.
Yeah, I mean, we're really fortunate that we have that kind of information, that our brain does go through different stages and phases, but we have to remember it's not linear.
Mm.
You could go through all the stages, and the stages are, for example, denial or bargaining or anger or depression and finally acceptance. But you could do all of that in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And you resonated with
I
that.
did. I was like, I feel like I felt everything in the last
Yeah,
10 minutes, and then I've started over. So does that mean I'm backsliding? And you're like, no, it's again, because we talked about grief as an umbrella emotion. It
right.
houses all of these things. And for me, they would come in unpredictable waves. And then I would ride the wave. I'd be drowning in the wave for a minute. But
Hmm.
then when it would pass, it was like, oh, I felt everything, and it washed a little bit away. So it got back to me. So allowing myself to feel those things and not
Right,
shame them, not judge
right,
them, not feel like, oh, this is the wrong order,
right.
right? Not shooting them again, allowed it to wash away a little bit at a time and get back to me.
And there were moments I remember, and this is also very normal, where you felt, okay, I've got this. I
Mm-hmm.
think I'm okay. I think I'm me again. And the next time you'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm in terrible grief. I'm sad. I'm crying all the time. I'm losing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why we stress that the stages are not linear.
Yeah.
It's your body and brain trying to cope with this new overwhelming emotion.
Yeah.
And I want to touch on what you just said about acknowledgement, or rather, not shaming yourself. The first key to treating grief is to acknowledge it.
Mm. I say that all the time. You can't fix what you're not aware of.
You have to be kind to yourself and say, I'm supposed to be feeling like I'm going crazy,
I'm
right?
supposed to be feeling it
Right,
manages expectations, right? Because before the grief, I had these expectations of just get back to it, just get back to it,
right, right.
and perform, perform, perform. But once that gave me the grace to recalibrate, reset my expectations of myself,
Hmm.
of my brain, of oh, this is normal.
Right,
So it's okay that I'm not fully functioning right now.
right,
It allowed me to realize I was enough in that moment.
correct. I love that word, enough.
Mm.
You know, one of the things that I spoke to you about was first attending to the physiology of the body, to calm it down, to self-soothe, to comfort. Right? You're in grief. You need to be comforted, as opposed to, well, let's get out there and be normal again.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to acknowledge all those emotions and then attend to them, be kind, take it a bit easier, because the symptoms of what I've described happens to the brain. We feel foggy. We feel
Foggy.
confused. We feel, oh my gosh, my memory, I don't remember what my boss just said.
I couldn't
I walk
think.
away. Or you're in a meeting and you go blank,
Or you call your boss a narcissist.
or you call your
And
boss a
you don't,
narcissist.
before you even realize what's coming out of my mouth. And as soon as I said it, I was like, I like turned around and I was like, who said that? That wasn't me.
Right, right.
So I remember, yes, the fog
Yeah.
of not being able to think clearly. I was like, why can't I think? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's my bread and butter. That's what I get paid to do, is think.
Yeah.
And I couldn't. And that was
Yeah.
scary.
And that was your anxiety of, can you fix me? Can I get better? And how long is this going to
And how
take?
quickly.
Right. And that is just part of the anxiety. And it just perpetuates the limbic system.
It makes it
Right?
worse.
It
Yeah.
just makes it worse.
Yeah. It really did.
So I think what you did was right. You honestly just did the homework. You did the work and studied on it, and you realized what was going on with you, and you were able to self-soothe. Coming to the workplace, I think one of the first things I remember telling you was, how comfortable are you with, having a discussion with your boss or your manager, your supervisor, or even your co-workers, and do a bit of psychoeducation. I'm going through grief, and I believe this is what happens. So would you bear with me for the next few months or so? That takes the edge off your fear and worry about how you show up at work.
Mm-hmm.
When people understand, oh my gosh, bear with her, anything can come out of her mouth, it puts you at ease. And what happens when we're at ease? Our frontal lobe is re-engaged.
Yes. The blood flow
And
comes
we're
back online.
absolutely able to be functional and think logically and use all our reasoning again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's helpful to your audience, that you might want to sit with somebody at work who you're comfortable with to explain what's really going on in your
Yeah.
body.
Well, that was again the whole point of this episode, is this is not something we talk about in the workplace.
No,
Like, it's just not talked about. The thing is though, we all literally experience some type of grief. We are humans in the workplace. So to not talk about it just seems kind of silly. And because we don't talk about it, managers don't know how to deal with it when people that report to them are going through it. Because my manager didn't understand. It was a month later and he's like, why are you still struggling? And I was like, or he was like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I'm struggling. And he was like, he kind of forgot, right? Because we all move on with our lives. We do, what we have to do. We can't remember every little thing about everybody. So I had to kind of advocate for myself in that, of like, I'm doing the best I can in this moment. And this experience has helped me with my coaching. And I've had people come to me where their dads have been sick and
mm,
gotten cancer. And they're like, I don't know how to show up. I'm kind of messing up at work and I feel like I need to cover for this. And I was like, I said exactly that. I was like, you need to let your boss know what's going on with you and help them manage expectations, because we're humans. We are so adaptable. When we have expectations that are clear, we can manage around them. We can deal with pretty much anything. It's the unknown and the stories that we've talked about on this show before, that, the stories about you that are happening around you when you're not in the room. This is how you can control the narrative a little bit better when you're not in the room, is letting people know where you are. You don't have to overshare, but letting people know, because we're all people, letting people know where you are and what's going on and giving them a little bit of insight gives them something to work with so they can protect you in rooms you're not in.
that's exactly right. People, we we'll be surprised at how empathetic people can be once we tell our story,
Mm,
because it's your story. You can't discount that. And when you're talking to somebody and saying, this is happening to me, you're educating them at the same time, but you're communicating. There's a bond that happens when you're vulnerable, right? And very rarely do people throw that back in your face.
yeah.
Generally, people are quite kind about it. And it just lessens that anxiety for you.
And it's a bonding thing. It's a slightly vulnerable moment, but
Yeah,
when we're vulnerable and we show up, we give other people permission to do the same.
correct.
And grief is something we have all felt
Yeah,
in one way or another. So it is a relatable emotion
yeah,
that, hey, I'm going through this thing. I'm working through it in my own way. I don't need you to work through it with me, but I need you to be aware of, I coached a woman whose, again, dad got diagnosed with an illness. And I told her, I was like, you just need to set those expectations of, hey, I might miss a couple things right
right.
now. I don't want to. I am aware of it and I'm working through it. And that expectation took so much pressure off of her to because she felt like, same with me, that you had to show up perfectly and not be
Mm.
human at work. And by just admitting this and setting expectations, that gave her manager more leeway to be, okay, now I know how to support you. Now I can double check your work before we send it on, or, whatever collaboration decisions they came up with together. It was then a thing they came up with together. They were able to work together to help. It was them versus a problem, not them versus each other.
Right.
Yeah.
And another beautiful thing about the brain is, we have that human capacity to tolerate some level of discomfort in our lives,
Mhm.
which is that's another tool really to help your brain calm down and recalibrate. Because shock, trauma is, it's fear evoking, right? You're like, oh my God, I'm going to lose it. I
Yeah.
don't know what I'm going to do. Uh, And then a tool would be to sit yourself down, separate yourself. I do this beautifully. I'll say, I need to run to the restroom real quick, or I wonder if I'm getting a call. Just kind of for a few seconds, separate yourself and then sit there and tell your brain, speak to your brain, and almost comforted with the knowledge that this is hard. I know. But I do actually have the capacity to carry and tolerate some amount of discomfort so that the brain goes, oh, okay, so stress and trauma, I'm not going to lose
I'm
it.
not
I'm not going to
dying.
go crazy. I'm not going to die. No, I can tolerate some of it. I'll be okay.
Be okay.
So that's just another tool to, when we say self talk,
Yeah.
it's truth. It's speaking truth to the
Mhm.
brain, really.
Yes, because I know my brain can get spun up on some stories pretty quick. And so speaking of tools, one thing I really did and that helped me a lot was when we talked about that shallow breathing when you're in
Mm,
that state of overwhelm and adrenaline, really doing what I call box breathing, or what is called box breathing. It's breathe in for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. And while I was doing that, when I would inhale, hold, exhale, and hold, I would say, I am safe, I am safe, I am safe. And I just imagine talking to my subconscious of like, hey, it's cool. We got this. There's no tiger. We're not dying. Nothing's chasing us. We can sit with some discomfort. It is uncomfortable. Yes. And that's why the power of words, it is uncomfortable and I can handle it.
correct.
Yeah,
Exactly right. You did a good job. But I think the important thing to remember is that you've got to put in the work. It does.
absolutely.
It takes work.
I like to think like I knew I needed to address this pretty quickly because I didn't want to bury it, because I know it's what I call like an emotional interest. Is the sooner that you do the work, the less dysfunction comes from it. So if I didn't do the work, then I knew later it was going to come out somehow, because you can't avoid these big feelings. You can repress them for a while, but then you get dysfunctional coping mechanisms and a sideways anger and things
Yeah.
like that, outbursts like that. So, I didn't want to pay that emotional interest. I wanted to pay it all up front and do the work so I could move on in a healthy way.
And you did.
And I think that that's why I wanted to do this episode again, is just so people can understand, that these are big feelings, but you're manageable
Yeah.
with the right tools.
Abby, we also need to remember that grief looks different for different people.
Mm.
It is not a one size fits all.
Oof.
So, everyone's life is different, circumstances are different. And we need to wear grief in a way that's comfortable for us.
Grief in a way that's comfortable for us. That's really, oh, that's like an expansive thought. That's really freeing.
Mm.
And the symptoms of grief look different on everyone, but the biology is the same. And so that's really what I think is fascinating, is like we're all going through the same thing, we just show it differently.
Right.
And so giving each other the grace and space to be able to show it and process it how we need to, but knowing that we're all, you know, that feeling unites us in a
Hmm.
way, is makes us more human.
You got it.
And being more human at work is gonna save the world.
Right.
So, thank you again so much for joining us today. Well, I think this was a great episode. Thanks for watching. And if you are struggling with any of these things, like think about reaching out to a grief therapist. It literally changed my life. It changed the game for me. It made me better at work. Like I was able to come back better than I was even before. So, I highly, highly recommend it. So, thank you, Angela, again for joining. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. If something resonated, let us know about it. And if there's other topics you want to hear about, let us know. Like and subscribe and follow for more. Okay, bye.